Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia Jr., and with me, as always, is the relationship builder that is Jennifer Woolman. Jennifer, say hi.
Hello, everybody.
So, Jennifer, we're going to talk about a very fun topic, something that the entire world prepares to accelerate over, watch with excitement, all right? Fight over, argue over, attend, which is this event that happens every 4 years, and that is the majesty of the World Cup, which is coming to the U.S., and specifically for a lot of great games. It will be here in Miami. And we want to talk a little bit of the logistics surrounding the World Cup.
Yes, a lot. So I just came back from Switzerland, and FIFA is obviously Switzerland-based, so I feel like this is super timely.
I love it.
And a lot of obviously, the legwork and the leasing and the organizing started several years ago when Miami was awarded some of the games. So some of this is background, and there's not a lot of lease up to do, but in terms of the logistics required, I just thought it was fascinating. Obviously, the World Cup itself is going to have a huge effect on commercial real estate, from hotels and restaurant, occupancy and sales going up, to obviously office requirements, warehouses, etc. Right. Not just from FIFA itself, but from all of the supporting companies that, just the size of an event this big is kind of mind-boggling when you get into it. So in addition to, the local host committee is, hired a lot of local people, and they have requirement so figure the games we'll get into in a little bit, but other than the games, the local host committee has a lot of fan type events that they have to oversee, and those include but are not limited to a VIP dinner for 300 guests at the Faena in Miami Beach. There's Copa del Sol community tournament, which is at Loomis Park in Miami Beach, and that's expected to be about 500 people per day. There's the Miami Beach World Cup concert that is also in Miami Beach. There's the FIFA Fan Festival at Bayfront Park for about 30,000 guests. Then there's a fan festival at Bayside Marketplace. There's like an Experience the Game event on Miami Beach, Legacy Dog Park event. I mean, there are just so many events for people who aren't necessarily going to the games, but for the community to still be involved if they weren't lucky enough to get tickets to everything and to still feel like they're a part of it. Yeah. Every single one of those events requires logistics, right? How are you going to move that number of people there? How are you going to supply the food and beverage for the people there, the equipment needed to build the stands or the tents, or the infrastructure required for the bands to play, all of that. And so I thought it would be really interesting to just kind of take a look at that, because then on top of all of the fan stuff, you have the actual games, which require, food and beverage, construction and industrial materials, manufacturing and automotive for all of the machines and the cars and the buses required to move people, the energy component if you need generators for a lot of these spaces, and then obviously the more common, the retail and the e-commerce of all of the goods that are sold at all of these venues. So
yeah, to your point, Miami's going to host 7 matches, which include the quarterfinal and then the third place match, which is going to be in high demand. And some people are looking at this almost like an infrastructure stress test to the city, almost like, if an infrastructure can handle this global city demand, kind of like a simulation of Miami becoming a true global mega city. And, to your point about the logistics of, the airport capacity, the traffic flow, transit coordination, ride-share demand, security operations, crowd movement, hotel transportation. It's going to be really, really, really interesting to see basically how this city adapts to this short but very intense period of games. It's going to be a lot of fun to see. I'm wondering, because the FIFA projects that the tournament contributes or will contribute $17.2 billion to the U.S. economy overall. And you and I have spoken about how important an event like this is to the P&Ls of hotels. Will the World Cup permanently change investor appetite for hospitality assets in South Florida, or are they going to see it just as a moment in time?
I don't know. We have hotels listed for sale, and we've been seeing an uptick in requests and in proposals and letters of intent on some of them. I think overall, the hospitality industry the last couple of years was kind of in a slump, and I think it's starting to pick up again, at least in terms of investor interest. And, ironically, a lot of the interest that we're getting on these are from overseas markets. So I think that's interesting. What I also find is, so from the logistics standpoint, outside of the hotels and the visitors coming, is how the infrastructure comes together, right? So the major infrastructure hubs for FIFA and all of the equipment and people coming in are Miami International Airport, Opa-locka Airport, and Port Miami. So the infrastructure there, and I'm thinking specifically of the construction going on with the arch and the entrance and exit to the port there. I think there's, to your point, I think we're going to show some congestion points, some bottlenecks, right. I don't know what else to call it, just because of the amount of construction going on specifically on our infrastructure at a time when we're going to have a massive influx of people and equipment coming in. So I do think there's going to be some strain, and we're going to require a ton of patience. But out of the economic impact that you mentioned overall for the U.S., there's an expectation that there's going to be $1.3 billion in economic impact directly to our region. And the state has earmarked, infrastructure, funding for upgrading infrastructure that, again, started several years ago. It's not like it's starting now when the games start in June. But I think that that's all going to be, in the long run, a big positive, these events and the amount of money that's required by cities, states, and counties to invest in these types of events. The long-term effect, they, like you said, it's going to be short and compact, and then they're going to be gone. But the infrastructure that was built to maintain it and to support it are going to remain. And then it provides the opportunity to continue doing these types of events and to better them every time, because a lot of the infrastructure is already in place.
Yeah, and interestingly, as opposed to other examples in the past for cities that have hosted like the Olympics or that have hosted other FIFA World Cups, is that, we didn't have to build a new stadium. We had a stadium that had the capacity that it was required. I'm sure they've made upgrades, and, there were investments that were made. But to your point, this is not going to be the case where we're going to have basically a stadium go dark after the end of it, because, I think it's very very in keeping with what Miami has become, which is almost like a sports capital, model for urban development. Not only do you have the FIFA World Cup coming in here, which is, incredible. You have Formula One, Inter Miami with Messi and the growth of that, with the new stadium, the Miami Open. You have all these major concerts. You have UFC. A lot of UFC fights have been coming to Miami. That has been very popular. The growth of cruises, all these global conventions, the eMerge and things like that are going to increasingly come more and more into the city. So, to your point, it's, again, it just feels like it's a simulation of, okay, these are the stress points. These are the things that we can address. So it's going to be really interesting about what happens after, right? After FIFA comes here and, when there is a debrief of what worked, what didn't work, what can, be better in order to host, an event like that, like this in the future, I think it's incredible. I remember having a conversation because we were in the conversation for hosting an Olympics, throughout the United States, and then hosting, the FIFA World Cup, and Miami was a part of that in the past. And I remember people saying like, oh, it's going to take, 20 years before Miami would be eligible to really host or, would be granted. And here we are, a much shorter timeline than people were expecting, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, and I wanted to focus specifically on some of the sectors of our market that have had some softening, mostly the warehouse. We saw, it spiked and pricing and everything spiked during COVID, and since it's tapered off and we've actually seen some vacancy rates rise and prices coming down a bit per square foot in terms of leases. And most of the big companies and the big players in FIFA, secured warehouse space, a year and a half to 2 years ago. But there's always that tricky little last mile, that portion. And that is going to be especially needed here for the logistics side of delivering, especially stuff like food and beverage that might require refrigeration, et cetera. And those last mile spaces tend to be harder to get short term. The vacancy rate isn't as high as it is for some of the bigger Class A space. So what are you seeing? I know some of the big markets, just because it's Opa-locka and Miami Airport, are obviously North Bay Village, Miami Airport West, Doral, the areas around Opa-locka. But what are you seeing in terms of warehouse, either demand, or have you noticed much of a difference?
I think there's still demand for owner-operators that want to purchase their industrial space. They want to have a little bit more control over that cost, and they want to obviously take advantage of owning the asset. I'm seeing more and more new properties come into the marketplace for lease, and it just feels like they've been on the market a little bit longer. I think that the rents are holding, but they're certainly not pushing past where they are today. But I'm just seeing a lot of inventory and a lot of different options for, viable options. Some companies are expanding, so they're in this, weird time where they're tight in the space that they need. Maybe they need 33% more, but now they're thinking, wow, we've grown fast, or we've grown, at a healthy pace. Is 33% enough? Do I need to take a space that has 50% more space? So do I go from 20 to 30? Do I go from 20 to 40? Even though inventory has grown, those 30 to 50,000 are not always available, right? Or readily in the location that people are looking for. So that's kind of how we're seeing that.
Okay. And I also think...
Are you seeing anything different, or?
So I haven't been seeing a lot of demand for warehouse. I mean, that's normally not my niche. And a lot of the warehouse that I have been seeing is more for retail, just because retail rents are so high.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been seeing.
Yeah, the flex spaces that can be both. That they usually have a garage door. They don't have there's no dock height. There's no huge, ceiling height or anything like that, but those spaces seem to be, moving, a lot faster just because of the flexibility. You could use it for so many different things.
Correct. I've also seen kind of a decrease in the amount of time, both in, not just in warehouse, but in office space, that some landlords are still really pushing for the 5 to 7 to 10 year leases, but most of these, especially the smaller tenants, are looking for 1, maximum 3-year leases, and they want that flexibility. Are you seeing that? I mean, not so much. You're not going to see so much in the bigger spaces.
I'm seeing more 3-year requests rather than 5.
Right.
I'm seeing some of those, can I rent for a year or two, test the market, see if I can make it work. I'm seeing on the opposite side, I do see some people that want to have 10-year leases, and the landlords are resistant to doing the 10-year. They want to have a little bit more control. They don't know what they want to do with the property yet, long term, and they don't want to marry themselves to something like that.
So are they doing?
Then do like a 5-year, and then maybe like a 3-year option or something like that, where they're not committing themselves fully to a full
10-year. Yeah, I'm seeing that too on the landlord side, and I'm not seeing as many options on the landlord side.
Right.
Being given. The tenants want it, but the landlords aren't as willing to give.
I just had a conversation with an industrial broker who was telling me that he's seeing the TI request, that he's seeing more desire by the landlords to provide free rents rather than giving any outright TI.
Right, we're seeing that. Yeah, I'm seeing that in the office and retail space as well, although the retail space, depending on your market, isn't really needing much of that. And I think all of this, is, these events, and we spoke about it earlier with Formula One, but now with the World Cup coming, I think if you think about the timing of this right now, given the overall sentiment in the economy and the commercial marketplace and deal flow and everything else because of political uncertainty with the war, it's not what we expected when the year started, right? Everybody was expecting 2026 to have increased deal flow and things to kind of loosen up and capital to start moving. And we're still in a flux because of the war. And the reality is that unless you're an owner who bought during the pandemic, you're sitting in a pretty good place. So you can play with your rents a little bit during this short period. You can hold off and not sell if you don't want to sell yet, which I think is why we're seeing some owners are thinking of selling, they're thinking of getting out, but they're not thinking of it now just because they don't think they can maximize their sales price. Yeah. And I think that's why we're starting to see some of the willingness to do shorter rents, not investing in TI, giving the free rent, because then they're not into it that much monetarily, that when things loosen up as is expected once the war is resolved and when interest rates come down a little bit more and things stabilize a bit, they're going to be able to get maximum dollars for
no, without a doubt. It just feels very much like there's a sense of being in limbo, and there's a hesitation to make long-term commitments, on both sides there. And I think also we have, so think about the amount of inventory. So the way I look at this is a lot of the inventory that is there that has joined into the marketplace. These are tenants that leased out right at the start of the pandemic or right around that time. And we've seen since a huge increase in what the cost is to rent per square foot.
Correct.
And so I think what's happened now is there are some business owners that all of a sudden are seeing a 50% increase of their base rent. And so there's a sticker shock that comes with, I wasn't paying attention and the market has shifted on me, and now I'm ready to renew. I have an option to renew, but it's going to cost me a lot more than what I expected.
Right.
And in some cases, instead of going back and saying, well, how has my business grown, right? Let me look at it as a percentage of my overall revenue. What is the percentage of my rent based on my overall revenue, they're just shocked by the number, so they see it as very high. But when they go back and they look at their P&Ls, they realize that they are right around the same percentage that they're paying for the space of their revenue.
The only exception, I think, might be like food and beverage and hospitality, just because those are still soft and the costs to fill those spaces are so high, right? You have much higher labor costs and everything else, less labor available for those positions, et cetera. I mean, we've seen a lot of those positions were lost during COVID and just never came back. Sure. So I think they're getting a little bit more pressure than others. But I think the whole logistics of FIFA and these events is going to bode well for our commercial market in the long run. And I think even this little dip in terms of pricing and number of deals getting done and everything is going to result in a healthier market overall because, let's be real, you can't keep going up at the level that prices have been going up because that's inflationary, right?
Yeah, for sure. No, and things have adjusted, and I think to your point, I mean, that is a sign of where we are in that inflationary, deflationary, cycle per se. There's no, if they were keep going up, then, we would be in trouble in other ways. To your point. So I'm wondering, is Carlos a big FIFA?
It's so funny. He was a big soccer fan, and then he always used to watch the World Cup. Right. And I mean, I remember summers where we'd be glued to the TV, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so this just never ends. It's kind of like a baseball game that goes into the gazillionth inning. But now I think he's going to get into it more because we're in Miami. We're not going to any games, but we'll probably go to some of the local bars that are having parties and everything else with our, depending on who's playing with our team colors.
Yeah, listen, I mean, and I think there's something like that. And one of the things to mention about this is, the eyes of the world are going to be here. And they've been hearing about Miami and they've been talking about Miami, but, I'm sure Miami is going to showcase itself very, very, very well.
So looking forward to, doing a wrap up at the end of the year to see what happened with the World Cup and some of these events. I know we just did an episode on Visit Florida and the results there for 2025. And all of these events, I think, are going to be great for Miami overall. I think they're going to boost our tourism numbers, which in turn boosts our, state income. And I think it's going to really help stabilize a lot of our commercial real estate. All righty, short but sweet.
Absolutely. All right, guys, enjoy the World Cup. Enjoy our stage on, our global stage, our presence in the global stage. Thank you for pulling up a chair and listening. Until next time, say bye, Jennifer.
Bye.